The stars above Earth had always looked peaceful at night. But on the morning of March 14th, 2187, they stopped being peaceful forever. Every telescope on Earth swung toward the same point in the sky at the same time. It was not a meteor, it was not a satellite, it was a fleet, the largest fleet any human eye had ever seen. And it had appeared out of nowhere, sitting just beyond the moon like a wall of metal and shad. Alarms went off in every military base on the planet. Emergency calls flooded into the UN Space Council. Admiral Merk Voss was in the middle of eating breakfast when his communicator lit up. He looked at the screen, saw the image of the fleet, and put down his fork. He did not panic, he simply stared at the image for a long moment, then stood up and walked to the window of his office. He looked up at the sky, even though he could not see them from where he stood. "How many ships?" he said to the officer who had called him. "We count over 4,000, sir," the officer said, "and they are not moving." Voss nodded slowly. "Get me a line to every fleet commander on the planet right now." The fleet did not attack, it just sat there above the moon like it was waiting for 3 hours. The world held its breath. Every news channel on Earth was broadcasting live footage. Every government was on emergency alert. Every military unit on the planet was at full readiness. And then the fleet did something unexpected. It sent a message. The message came in on every open frequency. At once it came in hundreds of languages at the same time, as if whoever sent it had studied humanity for years and prepared for this moment. The voice that spoke was not human, it was high and clicking and strange, like someone speaking through teeth that were not shaped for words, but the words were clear. "We are the Velthari conquered. We represent 41 species across 6 star systems. We are not here to fight, we are here because we are afraid. We are asking for permission to speak to your leaders. We are asking you not to shoot, we are asking you to listen, because what we have to say may be the most important thing your species ever hears." The UN Space Council met within the hour. They argued for 20 minutes about whether to respond. Voss sat in the back of the room and said nothing. He watched the politicians talk, and he watched the generals look nervous, and he said nothing. He had already made up his mind about what he thought, but this was not the moment to say it. They agreed to respond. They sent a message back. They gave permission for 1 ship to approach Earth orbit and 1 representative to come down to the surface. The ship that descended was enormous even by itself, a dark curved vessel that moved like a slow shadow across the blue sky of Earth. It landed in a field outside Geneva, Switzerland, flattening a kilometer of grass simply by the force of air it pushed down as it landed. The being that stepped out was called SSK. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with 6 limbs and a body that looked like something between a mantis and a crab. His eyes were large and gold, and they moved independently of each other. He wore no armor, no weapon. He walked with his 4 lower limbs and held his 2 upper limbs open and away from his body, in what the translation system quickly identified as a gesture of peace. He was brought into a large hall where 50 world leaders sat in a horseshoe arrangement. Voss stood at the side of the room against the wall, arms folded, watching. SSK stood in the center of the room, and he spoke for almost an hour. He told them about the Vreth. The Vreth were not a species in the way most people understood the word. They were not born, they were built, or they built themselves, or some version of both that even the conquered did not fully understand. They were old, far older than the Velthari, far older than any of the 41 species in the conquered. They had been dormant for a long time, sitting in the outer dark between galaxies, doing nothing. But 8 months ago they had woken up, and since waking up they had moved through 14 star systems. Moved through meant destroyed. Every living thing in those systems was gone. Every ship, every station, every planet with life on it, all of it gone. The Vreth did not take prisoners. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply came and they consumed, and they moved on. 14 systems in 8 months. The conquered had tried to fight them. They had sent their best ships and their best weapons and their best warriors from multiple species. The result had been complete and total destruction. Every fleet they sent was gone, every strategy they tried was learned and countered by the Vreth almost immediately. "They adapt," SSK Rex said, and his golden eyes were very still when he said it. "Every weapon we use, they study, and the next time we use it, it does nothing. They learn everything we do. They have never faced anything they could not eventually defeat. That is not the terrifying part." He paused and looked around the room. "The terrifying part is that they are coming here. They are heading toward this part of the galaxy, and Saul is directly in their path." The room was completely silent. SSK Rex straightened and spoke very carefully. "We are not here to ask you to fight them. If you fight them, you will lose and you will be destroyed. And then the energy signature of your battle will draw more of them faster and more of us will die. We are here to ask you to do nothing. Go dark, power down your weapons, power down your communication signals. Live quietly, do not broadcast, do not fight. If you make no aggressive signal, there is a chance, a small chance, that the leading tendrils of the Vreth will pass through this system. Without stopping, you must be invisible. You must be silent. You must do nothing." Voss listened to all of this. He did not move, he did not react, he just watched SSK Rex's face and listened to every word. The world leaders talked for hours after SSK Rex was escorted out. There were arguments and fears and speeches about humanity's survival. The vote at the end was nearly unanimous. The UN Space Council agreed to comply. They would go dark, they would power down, they would go silent, they would do nothing. Voss voted yes, along with everyone else. Afterward, as the meeting was breaking up, one of the generals walked over to him. "What do you think, Admiral?" the general asked. Voss looked at the door through which SSK Rex had left. "I think that thing came a very long way to tell us not to fight," he said. "And I think we should be asking why a species that has 41 members and 4,000 warships needs to fly all the way to a species it has never met to tell them to stay out of a fight." The general frowned. "What do you mean?" "If a stranger comes to your door and says, 'Do not go into the forest, do not make noise, do not fight the thing in the trees,'" Voss said, "the first thing you do is go home and sharpen every knife you own." He picked up his jacket and walked out of the room. 3 months passed. Earth went dark. Communications were reduced. Weapons systems were put on standby. The conquered fleet stayed in orbit, watching, nervous, their ships moving in slow, anxious patterns like animals packing in a cage. And then the sensors picked up something moving into the outer edge of the Sol system. It was a Vreth tendril, a forward scouting arm of their main body, slipping through the dark between planets like a cold finger reaching into a room. Every conquered ship in orbit began broadcasting on emergency channels. "Do not engage, do not fire, do not move, remain silent." Voss was on the bridge of the UES Thermopylae, Earth's most powerful warship. When the signal came in, he read it, he set it down on the console beside him. He looked out through the wide forward viewport at the stars. He smiled. It was not a warm smile, it was the smile of a man who had spent 3 months doing exactly what he had planned to do since the moment he heard the words, "Do not fight." He pressed a single button on the console. "All stations," he said quietly, "this is Admiral Voss, bring everything online." 3 months earlier, while the politicians were still celebrating their vote to do nothing, Admiral Merk Voss had gone home, sat down at his desk and started writing. He wrote for 6 hours without stopping. He wrote names of engineers, he wrote names of weapons, scientists, he wrote names of pilots and ship commanders and programmers and physicists. He wrote the names of people who thought the way he thought, people who did not accept the word impossible as a final answer, people who had spent their careers being told they were too aggressive or too creative or too willing to break rules. When he finished the list, he had 312 names. He made calls that same night. Within a week, every person on that list had been quietly reassigned to a project with no official name and no public record. The project was listed in military files under a budget line for deep space geological survey operations. Nobody looked twice at it because it was boring, and because the budget was small enough to seem unimportant. The real work was anything but boring. Lieutenant Commander Yara Solis was one of the first people Voss called. She was 34 years old, small and quick, with short dark hair and the kind of eyes that were always moving, always calculating. She had designed 3 weapon systems that the military had accepted and 2 that they had rejected because, as one review board put it, the concept is theoretically valid but operationally insane. She had kept both rejected designs in a drawer in her quarters. She had always believed she would need them someday. Voss met her in person in a small room in a facility buried under the Martian surface. 2 days after her reassignment, she walked in, saw the wall screen showing the Vreth footage the Conquered had shared during their briefings, and stopped. "You want to fight them?" she said. "I want to be ready to fight them," Voss said. "There is a difference." She looked at the footage for a long moment. The Conquered said they adapt to everything. The Conquered said they adapt to everything. The Conquered tried, Voss said. The Conquered has 41 species, and they all think in patterns that can be predicted. They have thousands of years of military history, and they all learned from each other. They have never had an enemy they could not eventually model and counter. He looked at her. "We have been in space for 30 years. We have not learned everything the Conquered knows, yet we have not had time to become predictable." Solis turned away from the screen and looked at him. "You think our inexperience is an advantage?" "I think our chaos is an advantage," he said. "Study the footage. Tell me what you find." She studied the footage for 11 days without sleeping more than 4 hours at a stretch. She watched the Vreth move through 14 different engagements. She watched how they responded to energy weapons, and how they responded to kinetic weapons, and how they responded to coordinated fleet tactics. She watched the armor of their ships shift and change between one battle and the next, reconfiguring to resist whatever had worked against them in the last fight. On the 12th day, she walked into Voss's office and put a data tablet on his desk. "Their armor is not reactive to the weapon," she said. "It is reactive to the decision behind the weapon. If an attack pattern is rational, if it follows logic that a thinking mind would follow, the armor can predict it fast enough to counter it, but a rational mind can only make so many decisions per second, and a rational mind tends to repeat what works." She tapped the tablet. "Look at the resonance data from the last 3 engagements before the Conquered gave up fighting. They stopped losing ships at the same rate right at the end, not because they got better weapons, but because 3 of their commanders had breakdowns under pressure and started making irrational calls, flanking attacks at bad angles, firing weapons at maximum power, with no targeting adjustment, ramming maneuvers that no trained officer would ever order." Voss looked at the data. The Vreth took longer to counter those attacks. "The Vreth took much longer," Solis said. "Not long enough to win, but long enough to show the pattern. The armor has a lag time when it cannot predict the threat. It is small, maybe 2 to 4 seconds. But 2 to 4 seconds is enough if you have the right kind of weapon and the right kind of plan." "What kind of plan?" She pulled up a design on her tablet. It was one of the 2 the review board had called operationally insane. A weapon that fires in a pattern that changes with every single shot based on random number generation. Not guided, not targeted, not following any ballistic logic. That a thinking mind would apply just noise fire at maximum rate in every direction with no targeting logic whatsoever, and reload and do it again. Voss stared at it. "That would waste most of the ammunition." "Yes," she said. "But the shots that land will land before the armor can adjust because the armor cannot predict a shot that was not aimed." She looked at him. "Humans do not fight clean, Admiral. We panic, we improvise, we do things that make no sense. We make decisions based on fear and instinct and stubbornness and anger. That is not a weakness. That is the one thing the Vreth cannot model fast enough to counter." Voss was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Build it." She built it. She built 3 versions of it and tested all 3 on target drones in the asteroid belt, while the rest of the solar system was sitting quietly in the dark, pretending to be invisible. The results were better than she had predicted. Meanwhile, the rest of the 312 people Voss had assembled were working on other things. Pilots were running simulations in which they were given no pre-planned routes and no tactical objectives, and were simply told to survive for as long as possible using any method they chose. Engineers were building a communications network between ships that had no central hub, so that if the flagship was destroyed, the fleet would not lose coordination. Engineers were retrofitting mining ships with weapons and turning cargo haulers into decoys. The Velthari liaison assigned to the Thermopylae was a nervous four-legged creature named Elivan. He had large, soft ears and pale fur, and he spent most of his time sending reports back to the Conquered about how peacefully humanity was complying with the agreement to stay dark. He was not permitted in most areas of the ship. On the 58th day of the dark period, Elivan got lost looking for the crew dining area. He took a wrong turn. He walked through a door that was supposed to be locked, but had not been properly secured by the officer responsible for checking it. He walked into a training bay. Inside the bay, 30 human pilots were in full flight simulators running a drill in which they were ordered to attack a model of a Vreth command cluster, using no formal tactics whatsoever. They were being graded not on hit percentage, but on how unpredictable their movement patterns were. The room smelled of sweat and adrenaline, and the screens around the walls showed explosion after explosion. Elivan stood in the doorway with his large ears pressed flat against his head. He found Voss 20 minutes later. "You were told to do nothing," Elivan said. His voice was very quiet. Voss looked at him without any change in expression. "We are doing something," he said. "We are getting ready. If the Vreth detect any energy signature from these activities, they will come directly to this system. You are putting every living thing in this star system at risk. You are putting every living thing in our fleet at risk. This was the agreement. You agreed to stay dark." "We are dark," Voss said. "We are very carefully dark. We are just also very carefully ready." Elivan stared at him. "You cannot beat them." "Maybe not," Voss said, "but I am not going to find out by sitting still." Elivan left the room. He sent a very long and very alarmed report back to the Conquered leadership that night. The Conquered sent back a message ordering Voss to stand down. Voss read the message, set it aside, and went back to work. On the 89th day, the long-range sensors picked up the Vreth tendril entering the outer edge of the Sol system. The Conquered fleet immediately began broadcasting orders to stay silent, stay dark, do not engage. Voss pressed the button that brought everything online. In the deep space between Mars and the asteroid belt, 7 warships powered up alongside the Thermopylae. Their weapons came online. Their engines burned. Their crews went to battle stations. Elivan found Voss on the bridge. He stood in the doorway and looked at the Admiral, and then at the view screen, and then back at the Admiral. "You are going to get us all killed," he said. Voss looked over his shoulder at the small pale alien with the flat ears. "Stay on the ship," he said. "Watch what happens." The Vreth tendril was not what anyone had expected. The Conquered briefings had described Vreth ships as large dark vessels with smooth surfaces, and no visible weapons array. The ship solely saw on the tactical screen, as the Thermopylae moved toward the asteroid belt, were larger than the briefings had suggested. And they moved in a way that made her stomach drop, because they did not move like machines. They moved like something alive, slow and fluid and purposeful. The way a deep ocean creature moves when it has no reason to hurry, because it has never met anything that could hurt it. There were 9 of them in the tendril formation, a loose cluster of dark shapes, each one roughly 3 times the size of the Thermopylae, moving inward through the system, without any apparent awareness of the 8 human ships accelerating toward them. Voss stood at the center of the bridge, with his hands behind his back. "Range to contact," he said. 40,000 kilometers and closing, the navigator said. "All ships confirm weapon status." One by one, the confirmations came back. 7 ships besides the Thermopylae, all armed, all with Solis's random pattern firing systems installed in the 3 weeks since she had finished the second version of the design. They had tested it, they believed in it. But belief and knowing are two different things. "Sir," said the communications officer, "the Concord is still broadcasting on all frequencies. They are ordering us to stop. They are saying the Vreth will detect our drive signatures." "We are already detected," Voss said. "They know we are here. Turn off the Concord channel." The communications officer hesitated, then closed the channel. The bridge went quieter. The Vreth ships had not reacted, yet they were still moving at the same slow, patient speed, still heading inward toward the inner planets. But a change was happening on the surface of the nearest ship. Solis was watching it on her weapons screen, and she felt cold when she saw it. The surface of the ship was moving, rippling slightly. The way water moves when something large shifts beneath it. The armor was reconfiguring. It was reading the drive signatures of the human fleet, and it was already beginning to prepare. "They know we are coming," she said. "Good," Voss said. "Let them prepare for ships that fight like us." He looked at her. "Fire when ready, Commander." Solis took one breath. Then she opened fire. The first volley from all 8 ships was not aimed, it was chaos on purpose. A screaming wall of kinetic rounds and energy bursts and decoy signal flares, all firing in every direction at full rate with no targeting control. Applied 8 ships making as much noise as possible all at once. A roar of fire that made no tactical sense because it was not supposed to make sense. The Vreth armor rippled harder. It was trying to reconfigure. It was used to organized attacks. It was used to weapon systems that aimed, that tracked, that followed ballistic logic. It was used to thinking enemies. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then a round hit the side of the nearest Vreth ship. It was not a targeted round, it was one of the 1,000 rounds fired with no aim at all, and it had traveled on a path that no targeting computer would have chosen, and it struck the armor at a point that was still reconfiguring, and it punched through. The explosion on the Vreth ship's hull was small. It was not devastating, but it was real. Solis heard someone on the bridge make a short, sharp sound, almost like a laugh that got stuck. "Again," Voss said, "keep the rate up. Do not let them get a read on the pattern." For 9 minutes, the 8 human ships fired like they were panicking, like the weapons officers had all lost their minds at the same moment, like nothing that happened in the next 3 seconds was connected in any way to what happened in the 3 seconds before it. Rounds went everywhere. Half of them hit nothing at all. A quarter hit rock and debris in the asteroid belt. A fraction hit the Vreth ships. But that fraction kept hitting in places. The armor had not finished adjusting. The Vreth did fire back. Their weapons were precise and terrible. One of the smaller human ships, the UES Ardent, took a direct hit to its engine section and broke apart in a bright silent bloom of light and debris. A second ship, the UES Calder, was struck twice and lost its forward weapons array and began venting atmosphere. Voss watched both ships die, and his face did not change. "Stay on them," he said. Solis was already adjusting on her screen. She was watching the Vreth armor patterns, she was watching the ripple and shift, and she was looking for the lag, the small window of 2 to 4 seconds she had found in the Concord's old footage, the moment when the armor had not yet decided what it was becoming. She found it on the second largest Vreth ship. "All weapons, target grid 774, firing solution theta random, go," she said. It was not a firing solution that any weapons manual contained. She had invented the term that morning. Every gun on the Thermopylae fired into the same general region of space around the Vreth ship, without coordination, and without pattern. The rounds converged not because they were aimed, but because there were so many of them that some had to land. They landed in the armor lag window. The second largest Vreth ship came apart. Not a crack, not a breach, not a fire. It came apart, split through by a series of kinetic hits that found the same structural weakness in a span of 3 seconds before the armor could close it. The ship went dark and began to drift, and then a secondary explosion somewhere inside it finished the job. The bridge of the Thermopylae was very quiet. Then someone said, "We just killed one." Voss did not celebrate. He was watching the remaining 8 Vreth ships on the screen. They had stopped moving inward. They were doing something. Shifting formation. Rearranging themselves. The surface rippling on all of them was intense. Now they were adapting fast. Faster than they had adapted to anything the Conquered had ever thrown at them. Because what the human ships were doing was genuinely difficult to model, but they were adapting. "We have maybe 4 minutes before they finish reconfiguring," Solis said. "After that our random fire will not work as well." "Then we do not give them 4 minutes," Voss said. He picked up the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, full advance, close to minimum safe range. Change your speed randomly every 30 seconds. Do not hold any course for longer than that." The human ships surged forward. What followed was not a battle in any clean sense of the word. It was a brawl. 8 ships against 8 remaining Vreth vessels in the space between the asteroid belt and Mars. And the humans fought as if they had been personally offended by the existence of the enemy, flying into impossible angles and firing from positions no trained pilot would choose and making decisions that would have failed any formal tactical review. A third Vreth ship died. The damaged UES Calder, with its forward weapons gone, turned itself sideways and used its rear thruster array to spin in a full circle while firing its remaining lateral guns in a continuous arc, a move that was completely tactically useless, and also struck a Vreth ship across its entire unprotected flank during a reconfiguration cycle, because the Vreth armor had not finished deciding which side of the Calder to prepare for. A fourth Vreth ship died. The remaining 5 Vreth ships broke. They did not retreat slowly. They turned, and they moved, and within 30 seconds they were accelerating back out of the system at full speed, back the way they had come, back into the dark. Silence fell across the Sol system. The Conquered channels, which Voss had switched off, came back on automatically. When the communications officer reopened them, the first voice that came through was SSK Rex. It was not the measured, composed voice that had spoken for an hour in Geneva 3 months ago. It was barely a whisper. "That has never happened before," SSK Rex said. Voss looked at the debris field where the 4 Vreth ships had been. He looked at the places on the tactical screen where the Ardent and the Calder used to be. He thought about the crews of those ships. "Get me a damage report on all remaining vessels," he said quietly, "and get a rescue operation moving for any survivors from the Ardent and the Calder." He looked at Solis. She was still staring at her screen, at the readings from the Vreth wreckage. "Commander," he said. She looked up. "Good work," he said. She nodded. She did not look happy. She looked like a person who had just confirmed that the door they had been afraid to open was real, that the thing on the other side was real, and that opening the door had not ended the problem, but only made the problem aware that the door existed. 2 hours later, long-range sensors picked up the signal they had all been dreading. The tendril was not retreating to report a failure. It was retreating to bring back something much larger. The full Vreth advance, the force that had swallowed 14 civilizations, had changed course. It was coming to Sol. The signal came in at 300 hours ship time, and by 400 every flag officer in the human fleet was awake and in the same room. Voss stood at the head of the table in the Thermopylae war room and looked at the faces around him. Some of them had been up for 30 hours. Some of them had fresh cuts and bandaged arms from the fight hours earlier. All of them were looking at the same thing on the central display screen, a mass of contacts on long-range sensors. Coming in from the outer dark, so many contacts that the sensor system had first flagged them as a calibration error. It was not a calibration error. "Best estimate," said the sensor officer, "is between 600 and 800 individual Vreth combat units. They are moving at standard advance speed. They will reach the inner system in approximately 60 hours. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then one of the fleet commanders, a woman named Rear Admiral Teska, said, We have 31 ships in the Sol system if 3 of them were damaged or destroyed fighting 9 Vreth scouts. What do 31 ships do against 800? More than 31 ships, Voss said. Every head at the table turned toward him. The conquered fleet is still in orbit above Earth, he said. 4,000 ships. They came here to warn us. They have been sitting in orbit for 3 months doing nothing because they are afraid. He looked around the table. That is about to change. They will not fight, Teska said. We saw how they responded when we engaged the scouts. They ordered us to stop. They are terrified of the Vreth. They were terrified, Voss said. They have never seen a Vreth ship die before. They have just seen 4 of them die. He let that sit for a moment. People stop being terrified when they see something they thought was impossible become possible. We are going to show them more impossible things, and they are going to decide they would rather fight alongside us than watch us die. He looked at Solis. What do we need to do differently against 800 ships? She had been quiet since they sat down, working on her tablet while the others talked. Now she looked up. We cannot fight them the same way we fought the scouts. She said random fire at high volume works when you have a small number of enemy ships in a tight area against 800 ships spread across the system. The same approach gets our fleet isolated and picked apart 1 ship at a time. She set the tablet on the table. We need to fight in a swarm, no formation, no flagship, no central command signal that the Vreth can target and destroy to collapse our coordination. Every ship acts independently with a simple shared objective: stay alive. Keep moving. Never hold the same position for more than 30 seconds, and find the lag windows in the armor whenever they open. That is not a battle plan, one of the other officers said. That is a street fight. Yes, Soli said, it is. Voss looked at the officer who had spoken. When is the last time a street fight followed rules the other side had already prepared for? He said. The officer did not answer. They spent 6 hours building the framework for what Solis had described. It was the least organized battle plan in the history of human military doctrine. And that was exactly the point. Every ship in the human fleet was given a frequency to broadcast on that was unique to that ship. Every captain was given 1 instruction. If you stop receiving signals from a specific ship, that ship is gone. Do not try to coordinate with it. Continue operating on your own. The fleet would function like a body without a brain stem. Every part moving independently toward the same goal with no central organ that could be cut out to stop everything else. When the framework was done, Voss opened a channel to the conquered fleet. He spoke directly to SSKRAC. Ambassador, he said, you came to us 3 months ago and told us not to fight. You told us that if we fought, we would all die. I understand why you said that you had fought the Vreth and lost. You had watched 14 civilizations be destroyed, and you could not find a way to beat them, so you stopped trying. He paused. We did not stop trying. We found a way, and yesterday we used it, and it worked. But yesterday was 9 ships, and today it is 800. And we need your fleet alongside ours, not because we cannot fight alone, but because more ships means more chaos, and chaos is exactly what hurts them most. A long silence on the conquered channel. Then SSKREC's voice came back. You are asking us to fight again. You are asking us to do the thing that destroyed our fleets and killed our people. I am asking you to fight differently, Voss said. I am asking you to stop fighting like the conquered and start fighting like us. Another silence, longer this time. What does that mean? SSKREC said. Voss looked at Soli. She almost smiled. It means, Voss said, that for the next battle every captain in your fleet is going to forget everything they were ever taught about tactics. They are going to move randomly, fire randomly, change course randomly, and ignore every piece of formal military training they have ever received. They are going to trust instinct over doctrine, and they are going to accept that some of what they do will make no sense, and that is not a flaw. That is the point. The silence this time lasted 4 minutes. Then SSKREC said, send us the framework. The Vreth arrived at the inner system boundary at 11:40 hours 2 days later. They came in a wall, A dark tide of ships that filled the long-range sensors from edge to edge, moving at the same patient, unhurried speed that the scouts had moved at, the same certainty in their motion that came from never having been beat. They slowed when they detected the fleet waiting for them. The human fleet and the conquered ships that had chosen to fight were arranged in no formation at all. They were simply present, scattered across an enormous volume of space, individual ships holding random positions and already in motion, already drifting and changing heading before the first shot was fired, because Voss had ordered all ships to begin randomizing their movement patterns 6 hours before contact. The Vreth armor began rippling immediately. It was reading the fleet, it was reading the signals, it was trying to build a model of what was facing it. Then the humans opened fire, and the model fell apart. 800 Vreth ships against a swarm of human and conquered vessels, fighting with no logic and no pattern, was a completely different experience from 800 Vreth ships against the organized and predictable fleets the conquered had sent against them. Before, it was like the difference between being attacked by a trained soldier and being attacked by 100 people in a panic, all at once from every direction, with no coordination between them. Vreth ships died. They died slowly, 1 or 2 at a time, each one finding the lag window in its armor struck before it could close, each one taken apart by fire that came from unexpected angles at unexpected times, but they died. The battle lasted 11 hours. In the 4th hour, the UES Calder, the ship that had been damaged in the first fight and had spun in a full circle to kill a Vreth ship, came apart under a sustained Vreth counterattack. It went dark and quiet and stopped moving, and nobody had time to mourn because there was no time for that. In the 6th hour, the Thermopylae bridge took a hit, a section of ceiling collapsed, a support beam came down across the left side of the command station, where Voss was standing, and struck him along his left shoulder, and the side of his head. He went down. Solis was across the bridge in 5 seconds. Voss was alive, but he was not conscious. The medical team got to him quickly. The bridge was still functional, half its screen still working, smoke in the air from a small fire that the suppression system had already killed. Solis looked at the tactical screen. She looked at the fleet positions. She looked at the Vreth formation. And she sat down in the command chair. "All stations," she said. Her voice was very steady. "This is Commander Solis. I have the bridge." In the 8th hour, Elivan, the Velthari liaison who had reported Voss to the conquered and who had stood in a doorway telling him this would get everyone killed, sent a signal from the communications bay, where he had been watching the battle unfold on the screens. He sent the signal to the conquered escort destroyer Sorrow of Moons, which had been holding position at the edge of the engagement zone, under orders from the conquered command to observe and not engage. His message was 3 words: "Go help them." The Sorrow of Moons broke formation. Then another conquered ship followed. Then 3 more. Then 20. Then the entire conquered fleet that had been holding back poured into the engagement like a wave, and they fought the way Voss had told them to fight, badly and unpredictably, and without any respect for the military traditions of their species, and it was glorious and terrible. In the 11th hour, Solis looked at what was left of the Vreth formation on her screen. She looked at the remaining cluster of ships drawing together around the command node, the central hub of the entire advance, the brain of the whole Vreth force in this system. She looked at how far away it was. She looked at the Thermopylae's remaining weapon load. She made a decision that she knew Voss would have called operationally insane. "Helm," she said, "take us directly into the command node formation full speed." The helmsman looked back at her. "All remaining weapons," she said, "fire everything at point-blank range. When we get there, everything we have left all at once with no targeting." The helmsman looked at the screen and then looked back at her and then turned forward and said, "Aye, Commander," in a voice that was very calm. The Thermopylae went forward. The Vreth command node saw it coming. The armor rippled and adjusted and prepared. But the Vreth armor had been built to counter tactics, and flying a flagship directly into the center of the enemy formation, and firing every weapon at once in every direction was not a tactic. It was not anything that a thinking mind trained in warfare would do. The armor prepared for something that did not come. What came was everything. The Vreth command node broke apart in a cascade of secondary explosions, each one triggering the next as the point-blank fire found every lag window in every section of armor before any of them could close. The Vreth advance stopped. The ships at the edges of the formation began to slow, to lose coordination, to drift. The ones that were still functional began to turn. They were retreating. For the first time in history, a Vreth advance had been stopped, broken apart and turned back. Soli sat in the command chair with smoke in the air around her, and alarms ringing on the damaged systems, and she looked at the screen, and she watched the Vreth leave, and she was very quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Get me a status on all ships, get me a count of survivors, and get someone down to the medical bay to check on Admiral Voss." She stood up from the command chair. Outside the viewport, the stars were still there, exactly where they had always been. Voss woke up in the medical bay 3 hours after the battle ended. He woke slowly, the way people wake when their body is not sure it is finished healing, and the first thing he saw was the ceiling of the Thermopylae medical wing, white and plain and very familiar because he had been here before for different reasons. The second thing he saw was Soli sitting in a chair against the wall, with a tablet in her hands and dark circles under her eyes. "Did we win?" he said. His voice was rough. She looked up. "We stopped them," she said. "They retreated." He was quiet for a moment. "How many did we lose?" She told him the number was not small. He lay still and listened to it, and did not let his face show what it felt like to hear it. "The Thermopylae," he said. "Operational," she said. "Barely. We have 40% of our weapon systems online, and the bridge is going to need a week of repair work, but we are flying and we are here." He sat up slowly, ignoring the pain in his shoulder and his head, the Vreth. She set the tablet down. "That is why I am still awake," she said. "The sensors have been tracking them since they retreated. They did not disperse, they did not break up, they pulled back to the outer system and they stopped there." She looked at him. "They are not leaving." Voss looked at the ceiling for a moment. "They are waiting." "Yes," she said, "and they are being joined by more ships." "Voss, whatever we just fought, it was not their full force. The numbers coming in on long-range sensors right now are much larger than anything we faced in the last 2 days. He was quiet again. "How large?" he said. "The Conquered calls it the Apex Cluster," she said. "It is what they used on all 14 civilizations. It has never been deployed in a battle where anyone survived to describe it afterward." She picked up the tablet and showed him the sensor reading. "We are looking at a contact count somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 ships." He looked at the screen for a long time. Then he swung his legs off the medical bed and stood up. "Get me my uniform," he said. When Voss arrived on the bridge, it was to a room of exhausted people who had been fighting or preparing to fight for the better part of 3 days. He looked at them, and he did not give them a speech, because that was not the kind of man he was. He simply said, "Everyone rest for 6 hours starting now. That is an order." And he sat down in the command chair himself so they would know someone was watching. While they rested, he looked at the sensor data alone. He looked at the Apex Cluster sitting in the outer system, massive and patient and very still, and he thought about what Solis had told him, that their random fire and their chaos worked because the Vreth armor took time to adapt, that the lag window was real but small, that the more ships you had throwing unpredictable fire at unpredictable angles, the wider that window became. He thought about 3,000 to 5,000 Vreth ships against what they had left. Then he opened a channel to the Conquered. He did not call SSKREC this time. He asked to speak to the full Conquered Council, every species, every military commander still in range. He told them what was coming. He showed them the sensor data. He did not soften any of it. He described the size of the apex cluster in plain numbers, and he said the words, "This is the same force that destroyed 14 civilizations." And he let that sit. Then he said, "I need every ship the Conquered can send. I need every species that has a weapons system and a crew willing to use it. I need them all here. And I need them willing to fight the way we fought, without rules and without doctrine. And I need them in the next 40 hours." The council debated for 4 hours, while the apex cluster sat and waited. Voss did not sleep while they debated. He sat in the command chair and drank coffee and watched the sensor screen. At the end of 4 hours, SSK-Rex's voice came through on the channel. "You are asking the Conquered to stake everything on a tactic that has worked in 2 battles," SSK-Rex said. "You are asking us to send every ship we have into a fight that we have only ever survived by running from. You are asking us to trust that the way humans fight is enough to beat a force that has never been beaten." "Yes," Voss said. A very long silence. "The council has voted," SSK-Rex said. "We are sending everything we have." 1,500 Conquered ships came in over the next 30 hours from 6 different directions. They came. Big warships and fast scouts and heavy platforms and old converted vessels that had not been in combat in decades. All of them converging on Sol. All of them responding to the first call to total mobilization the Conquered had issued in 300 years. Voss met with the commanders of every Conquered fleet group in a conference call that lasted 5 hours. He explained Solis' framework again. The swarm structure, the random movement, the absence of central coordination, the single shared objective. He watched 40 alien faces of different shapes and sizes and colors listen to a battle plan that violated every principle of organized military engagement they had ever been taught. Some of them argued. He answered the arguments. Some of them went quiet. He let the quiet be. At the end, they all agreed. The night before the apex cluster began to move, Voss stood on the observation deck of the Thermopylae alone. He looked at the stars for a long time. He thought about the 2 ships he had lost in the first fight, and the ones he had lost in the second. He thought about the crews. He thought about the Ardent and the Calder and the other names that were now just debris in the belt. He was still standing there when Solis found him. She stood beside him and looked at the same stars. "Do you think this works?" she said. "I think the only way to find out is to do it," he said. She nodded. "When I was 12 years old," he said, "my grandfather told me that the most dangerous thing in any situation is a human being who has decided that the situation is unacceptable." He looked at the place in the dark where the apex cluster was sitting. Every species in that Conquered spent the last 8 months deciding this was just how it was going to be. They accepted it. They adapted. They ran. They survived by making themselves small. He looked at her. "We spent 3 months sharpening every knife we own." She was quiet for a moment. "Let us go sharpen some more," she said. The battle for Sol's system began at 600 hours the next morning, when the apex cluster finally started moving inward. What followed was not a battle that could be described with clean numbers or simple timelines. It was 5,000 Vreth ships against a swarm of human and Conquered vessels that moved like a storm across an entire solar system, with no front line and no rear line and no command ship to kill, because there was no command ship. Just hundreds of independent units all making independent decisions at the same time, all wrong by any formal tactical standard, all real and unexpected and impossible to model fast enough to counter. The Vreth Apex cluster had consumed 14 civilizations. It had never met anything that fought like this. The battle lasted 19 hours. Ships died, both sides. Throughout all 19 hours, the losses were not small on the human and Conquered side. They were not small at all. But the Vreth losses were larger and more important because each Vreth ship that died did not just represent a ship lost. It represented the Vreth's ability to learn and adapt, being hit faster than it could rebuild itself. The armor lag windows were everywhere across 5,000 ships, all of them constantly reconfiguring, all of them falling behind. All of them finding that the chaos facing them was not decreasing, but increasing because, as ships were lost on both sides, the survivors fought with less coordination, and more desperation and desperation made everything more unpredictable. In the 14th hour, Voss ordered a maneuver that the conquered commanders in the call afterward said they still could not explain tactically. He split the entire swarm into 3 groups, and had each group accelerate in a different direction away from the apex cluster at full speed. Then 2 minutes later, on a preset signal, every ship in all 3 groups turned around and accelerated back toward the apex cluster from 3 different directions at the same time, all firing at maximum rate, with no coordination between them at all. The Vreth formation did not know which direction to face. The lag windows opened everywhere at once. In the 16th hour, the Vreth command hub, a vessel twice the size of anything in the human fleet, took enough fire through its unprotected armor sections to lose structural integrity. It came apart slowly, and then all at once. In the 17th hour, the apex cluster began to fragment. In the 18th hour, the fragments began to retreat. In the 19th hour, the last Vreth ship in the Sol system crossed the outer boundary heading away, and the long-range sensors showed every other Vreth contact in range doing the same, pulling back, not to regroup, not to wait, but moving away in a way that the conquered sensor analysts had never seen before. Moving away as if they had decided. The sensors tracked them for 72 more hours. They never stopped retreating. They passed through the outer dark. They crossed the boundary, where the 14 dead star systems where they kept going. They did not come back. 3 days after the last Vreth contact disappeared from sensors, SSK came aboard the Thermopylae. He walked through the corridors of the ship in silence, past the repair crews and the exhausted officers, and the places where the walls were still scorched and unrepaired, and he came to the observation deck where Voss and Solis were standing. He walked to Voss and stopped. Then he lowered all 4 of his lower limbs to the deck of the ship, and bowed his head, and held every limb completely still. It was the Velthari gesture of absolute respect, a thing their species had not given to an outside species in recorded history. Voss looked down at him. "Ambassador," he said, "please stand up." SSK raised himself slowly. His golden eyes were very direct and very steady. "We told you," he said, "that if you fought we would all die." "You did," Voss said. "We were wrong," SSK said. "You were half right," Voss said. SSK looked at him. "The Vreth died," Voss said. SSK was quiet for a long time. He looked at the stars through the viewport, and he looked at the places where the debris fields still drifted, and he looked at the 2 humans standing in the damaged room of a battered ship that had no business still being functional. "We have never understood your species," he said. "We studied you for 3 years before we came to warn you. We read everything we could find about how you think and how you fight, and how you survive. We thought we understood you well enough to predict what you would do." He paused. "We were wrong about that too." Solis looked out at the stars. "What did you think we would do?" she said. "We thought you would be afraid," SSK said. Voss put his hands in his pockets and looked at the viewport. "We were afraid," he said. "We were afraid the whole time." SSK looked at him. "We just did not let it stop us," Voss said. Outside the damaged viewport of a ship that should not have survived, the stars were completely still and absolutely vast, and for the first time in 8 months, not a single one of them had anything moving toward it that meant harm. The conquered had begged humanity to stay out of the dark. They had not understood until now that humanity was not afraid of the dark. Humanity was what the dark was afraid of.